All right. Hey, I'm Jason Slavin. Let's jump into the case study. The case study I chose is the one regarding the teacher that expresses critical and controversial views on things like interracial marriage and says disparaging things about biracial children, says some things about biracial children to the parent of a biracial child. And is warned several times by the principal to stop that behavior, but the teacher continues anyway. So, I wanted to start off first by including this picture of Richard and Mildred Loving, of course, the famous couple behind the Loving versus Virginia Supreme Court case that formally, created the legal groundwork to end laws that prohibited interracial marriage in the United States back in the 60s. So let's jump into the legal issues in this case. This case can easily be divided into two parts. The first one would be the concept of insubordination and whether or not the principal has grounds to terminate the teacher's contract for insubordination. And so when we look at insubordination, and I'm in Georgia, and so let's use the Georgia code for this one. Georgia does, under Title 20 of the Educational Code, they do have a section regarding insubordination, and clearly in the Georgia Code there is a provision that says that employees may be terminated for insubordination. And the definition for insubordination in this context is going to be if an employee refuses to follow a reasonable directive or is defiant towards a supervising authority. In this case, because the principal had given the teacher several warnings about her behavior and speech, and the teacher does not follow those warnings and continues with that behavior, clearly this falls under insubordination as per the Georgia Code, which means the teacher can be terminated. Courts are probably likely to uphold this termination since it is listed specifically, insubordination is listed specifically in the Georgia Code as a fireable offense. And as long as due process is followed and, the teacher has a right to respond to the accusations and understands or is made aware of what the issues were that led to her termination, as long as due process is followed, then the courts are probably very likely to uphold this termination because of the pattern of warnings and behavior. The other half is the issue of free speech and whether or not the free speech provision of the First Amendment applies to teachers in this context, because a teacher could very well argue that her speech is protected under the First Amendment. However, that would be a very incorrect argument. There's lots of precedent here, including Pickering and Garcetti, which basically says that, public employees, teachers included, whenever they're acting their official duties, they do not have free speech protections. And so basically, a teacher teaching in class, which the case study says that the teacher was teaching these beliefs as part of the instructional day, and the teacher expressed these ideas to a parent in a parent-teacher conference. Clearly, those are part of her official duties, which means they violate the law. I'd also like to bring in Georgia's divisive concepts law here. Back a couple years ago in 2022, the Georgia legislature passed their divisive concepts law. And there is one part of this that would be relevant to the case study, which is basically that teachers can't teach that an individual's moral character is inherently determined by his or her race. And so some of the things that the teacher said about biracial children could very well fall under the divisive concepts law. The divisive concepts law is very controversial, and because it has very confusing and broad language. However, it could be used in this instance to support the employee's termination. Some other risks: if the behavior is not addressed, there's possible civil rights, anti-discrimination violations, state and district level, and of course, the community losing trust in the school. So let's look at a policy recommendation that I came up with. My big idea here for this policy recommendation is to, instead of taking the approach of outlawing divisive policies, which is a bit broad, um, this law would promote instructional neutrality and inclusivity. Just very basically, that teachers should be neutral, straight down the middle when it comes to issues like race, gender, family structure in this context, identity. That teachers should not teach their own personal beliefs regarding this. And this law separates personal beliefs from curriculum, which I think is a great idea and something that the divisive concepts law does not do. Because, of course, teachers should not be teaching their own beliefs in the classroom. They should stick to the approved curriculum. And of course, this instructional approach of neutrality and inclusivity is supported by the National School Boards Association, which encouraged districts back in 2020 to adopt policies regarding instructional neutrality and respect for all. So let's move on to the final piece, the reflection. The first two questions focus on the case study and what I've learned from this, sort of in a more reflective manner. And so, kind of summarizing this, because I'm running over time. Basically, the idea here is that I did learn a lot of clarity regarding free speech as it applies to teachers. In my career, I've been teaching American history for 10 years. And of course, U.S. history is very much the subject that's being targeted by a lot of these divisive concepts laws. And so I've always kind of wondered, what the line is in regards to these laws. And so this case study, I chose this topic in particular because the case study itself really dives into where the line is. And are these fireable offenses? I learned a lot from that. And moving forward, as I assume a role of an educational leader, it's the job of educational leaders to not only understand the legal background for issues that may arise, but also to apply the laws. And in this instance, I very well understand now where the line is for what constitutes free speech and what doesn't. And when a teacher's free speech or claims for free speech might cross the line into unethical or potentially illegal behavior. So I'll definitely be able to take that knowledge with me moving forward. And here's my references. And thank you.